Hey everyone, hope you're rocking. I thought I would shoot this video quickly just before I head on out. So I'm going to the United States, going to be teaching several of my programs to my representatives there, and of course working with their students. Looking forward to it, excited, which got me thinking, because in the last week or so I've been getting a few personal messages with some videos, and it's very, very clear from watching those videos that the people that are teaching stuff on these videos, and most of these videos are actually up on YouTube, and I never go looking for these things, but people sent it to me. It's very clear that they've tried to rip off my program. It's very clear that they've tried to emulate stuff that I'm doing. Of course, they've renamed it, they've called it something else. There's no mention of me, there's no mention of Crazy Monkey Defense. Sadly, that's never going to change. It's the typical state of the modern martial arts world, and it's increasingly becoming more and more dysfunctional. And part of that was that in the old days, if you really wanted to learn something before the YouTube era, right, for the most part, if you weren't able to get, for example, a DVD instructional, and before that was VHS and Beta, right, for the most part, people would actually pitch up at a seminar, come down and train with you. Now, many of the people in the martial arts world, especially those that teach specifically, are thieves, and they just want to be big fish in small ponds and want to pretend that they are the fountain of all knowledge and take other people's work, not just mine. I see other people's work being stolen as well, and no credit given. But yet there are opportunities for them to train if they wanted to. We have a trainers program. Many of the other people that they rip off have trainers programs too. No, you know, they're not going to do that, right? They're going to pull the scumbag move, they're going to pull the cheap ass move, and they're going to basically just take what they want. And in doing that, though, invariably by doing that, it spreads misinformation. And that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of discuss in this video. So I'm going to set the record straight here, right? If at any time something looks like what I teach, but they happen to be only teaching the defensive action, so they're only teaching what is, you know, the most, I guess, visual thing of Crazy Monkey that most people recognize, right? The defensive action, the hands moving on top of the head. If that's all they teach, and that's all they know, then they've never trained in Crazy Monkey Defense. Because what I see people do, even when they buy my products, and this is kind of the interesting thing, many of these people that are ripping off my material, I've got your invoices. I know that you bought the products, right? People say to me, hey, did you see this person in the UFC using CM? And I'll have to like, yeah, unfortunately I know about that, because it's not that person, the fighter's fault, but I know the coach, and I've got the invoice in front of me of that particular coach who bought that product, right? And what I notice what a lot of these guys do is they cherry pick. So they recognize that obviously one of the hallmarks of my program is the defensive action. Most times when they're teaching, they don't have anything in the way of teaching functional defense. They think they know everything else, but definitely they know that they're lacking in defense. So that's the only thing they teach. It's like they switch off to everything else I've been saying, right, on these downloadable products, or in the old days when I used to put things out on DVDs. And then they go and take the defensive action that they don't fully understand in the first place, because they haven't been listening to everything else I've been saying, integrated into the bullshit that they're teaching anyway, and then it just looks horrible. And you know, it obviously what they're doing now works a little bit better than what they did before, but it doesn't work that well because they don't fully understand the rest of the program. I mean, I've seen some well-known martial artist people come out and say, oh, you know, if these guys use this, and they even mention the name, like Crazy Monkey, and they do this, then, you know, you're going to go to the body and you're going to do this and that. I'm like, dude, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, man. You haven't even trained with me. You haven't trained with anybody that I credit, like, and think is credible in my program, right? You're just taking the defensive action and you think that's what we teach. Drives me nuts. The defensive action, of course, it's an important aspect of Crazy Monkey Defense, but it is a small portion of the entire fucking program, right? Even then, most of these people who steal this stuff don't know that we have different types of defensive action. For example, I will use my CM one hand defense, at a distance. I will use my CM2 hand defense in closing the gap, moving in towards an opponent. And there are some very important reasons on why I do that. Now, to situate this conversation, this is what I want to talk about. Now, everybody knows, if they know anything about me, they know my backstory. I don't need to go through the whole thing again of how I was brought up in government housing, and I had to have routes to get home safely from the neighborhood gangs and so forth and so forth and so forth. I've said that so many times, okay? But the part for me that really kind of established my approach in self-preservation undoubtedly was the time that I spent as a doorman for several years outside some of Johannesburg's roughest nightclubs. And if you've read that part of my history, then you know I started just off as a doorman, worked my way up, eventually got to the point where I was running the contracts, had over 70 doormen working for me. I mean, I was working the door 7 nights a week, and when I wasn't doing that, I was moving around from one club bar to the next to ensure that everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. And anytime we got a backup call, in those days used to be on a pager, right, I had to fly out and go and deal with the situation. So my wife, Louise, she knows all those stories because she was around at that time. It wasn't, in hindsight, it wasn't the best time of my life, but it was the most important part of learning about interpersonal violence. Because in that time, I dealt with every conceivable situation that you can imagine. One-on-one situations, dealing with somebody who is as high as a kite on freaking God knows what kind of drugs and just will not go down, to multiple attack situations, to somebody trying to shoot me in a nightclub and almost getting it right had I not disarmed him, being taken on a few times outside the club and inside the club with a bladed weapon. When I say a bladed weapon, not always a knife. One time it was a beer bottle, and it was actually a woman who tried to stab me in the neck with a beer bottle after she smashed it on the side of the sink. I mean, I've been there, done it, got the t-shirt. That time, those 7 years, was kind of my formative training in the world of interpersonal violence. I mean, I came from interpersonal violence growing up. I was already well aware of what that entailed. But for the most part, whenever I could run away from it, I did that as a kid, right? But now I'm working as a doorman, and I'm the head doorman, and everybody is looking to me for answers and solutions and for leadership. There was no way of running anywhere. I had to deal with the situation head on, even if I was shitting myself. I had no choice, right? And so in that process, there were a couple of things that stood out time and time and time again for me. Okay, first thing, I'd always, in the back of my mind, second-guessed the traditional martial arts stuff I had learnt growing up as a child. In the back of my mind, I always thought, how is this stuff actually going to work in a real fight? Well, that came right to a head, and it was super evident in my face, raw, right, once I actually started working the door. I quickly fucking realized that for the most part, most of that stuff I had learnt in the traditional framework of martial arts was just going to get me hurt, or at worst, killed. So I started dropping all of that stuff out of my game. The second realization was the things that did work was a combat athletic base. So the things that saved my ass time and time again was my boxing training. And at that time, I was heavily into Muay Thai. If people don't know it, if you don't know the story, I mean, I traveled to Thailand for well over a decade. I was a student of Apidej Siturun. I was sponsored by Fairtex for quite a while. So I was deep embedded in Muay Thai, Western boxing, starting to get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, focusing a lot then on the clinch. That's the stuff, the combat athletic base. That is the stuff that saved my ass. More than anything else was the fact that when I wasn't working the door, I was at the academy, I was teaching, trying to make ends meet, trying to survive. Couldn't be a full-time martial artist back then. So it was between working the door and trying to survive as a full-time, or ultimately getting to a full-time martial arts position. So I was teaching at the academy, but I was sparring, and I was sparring all the time and sparring hard, right? If it wasn't for that, there is no way in hell I would ever have survived working the door. It just would not have been possible. My third realization was, as good as the combat athletically based systems are, boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and so forth, as good as they are, they also have drawbacks. They also have weaknesses. As a doorman, I had to not only worry about the threat in front of me, I had to worry about multiple threats. I had to worry about a changing environment. That a situation started as A and then ended up as B. Right? Where in the academy, on the mat, in the ring, however you want to define it, the parameters are quite set. You know what those parameters are. There's a rule base. You have one opponent in front of you. And so in that way, it actually is simpler because you have to only deal with a few variables. But as I've said in other videos, once you step out into the domain of the street and now you have to go hands-on with somebody, there are multiple variables, often unknown variables, that you now have to deal with. So coming out of that experience, coming out of that, growing out of that, as the roots of the time of being a doorman and growing the tree, so to speak, was Crazy Monkey Defense. That's where Crazy Monkey Defense came from. Crazy Monkey Defense did not come from a sport background. Did I compete in my early years in karate? Yes. I was even part of the South African Defense Force, Northern Transvaal karate team. So I competed in karate. I did pretty okay. I never really liked it, but I did okay. I competed when I was under Willie to Wheel. I boxed. I did okay. Wasn't really my thing, but I did it. So my kind of major experience, if you want to call it that, wasn't the competitive realm, but it was the street. That was my experience. And working outside the door, as I guess it's not something I should brag about, right? But I was good at it. I was good at working outside the door. That's one of the reasons why I ultimately became the head doorman. The reason why club owners wanted me to be in charge, because they liked the way I did shit and how I sorted out problems. The one thing that and this is just me personally, so people ask me this all the time. I'm going off on a tangent and I'll come back. But people ask me this all the time. Hey, Rodney, why didn't you carry on competing? I don't know, man. I hated it. I really didn't like it. I don't like this idea of knowing that you're going to be fighting somebody 3-4 months from now and working towards it. Some people love that stuff. I fucking hated it. It just, I don't know, I couldn't handle the kind of the internal aspect of that, the butterflies, what thinking about it. I hated it. But I had no issue dealing with interpersonal violence as it arose. And that's what the doors, working outside the doors, gave me. Right? I would be standing at the nightclub, minding my own business, watching the crowd, and suddenly something kicked off and I had to go deal with it. I was really, really good at dealing with that. And maybe that's because of how I grew up and always having to, entertain interpersonal violence and could never escape it. I don't know. But that's something I was really, really good at. So coming back to what I was saying, Crazy Monkey Defense never grew out of the sport background. It grew out of the street background. This is what people need to understand. The major components of Crazy Monkey Defense, the things that I ultimately developed and continue to hone over these years, were built first and foremost in the street, in actual fighting, not just against one person, against multiple opponents, like I said earlier, sometimes with or without weapons. So this is why when I describe Crazy Monkey Defense, I talk about it as a combat, athletically based self-preservation system. So if you didn't know any better and you were standing on the side and you just saw what we did, you may think that what we are doing is sport. But as you get on the mat and you come and train with us, you realize, hold on, the way that these guys approach this combat athletic base is very, very different. Because the one thing that we are always doing is we are always discussing and situating our training within the framework of self-preservation. So one of the things I mentioned on a previous video, and I'll just quickly mention that again, when you are in a purely combat athletic base, you are centralizing your focus on one immediate target in front of you, because the rules around that basically situates how you're going to attend to this particular opponent. Of course, out on the street in self-preservation, there may be multiple opponents. So now you have to have a decentralized focus. So even when we are training our combat athletic base, it's not within a sport mindset, it's rather within a street mindset. So we make the necessary adjustments and we teach those necessary adjustments to our students. So for example, to give you an example of a technique, what might that be? Okay, when I do a jab and a cross, most people when they do a jab and a cross, they got their hands somewhere around here and they throw the jab cross from there. Just me doing this in front of the camera right now, you see a glaring problem. My entire operating system is open. So when we teach a jab cross, we call it a diving board jab cross, meaning my hands are up on my cheekbones because I'm going to be fighting and defending myself on the street. I don't want my hands out here and exposing the operating system. I want to keep my hands back close to the operating system because I know what? This is not sport, right? And even in sport this happens often too, but it's not sport. And so 99.9% of people who are going to attack me are not going to run up to me in the street and hit me in the body, right? They're going to want to hit me in the head. And the reason they want to do that is because they know if they can switch off the operating system, the fight is over. So my hands are back, and then when I punch, I'm diving over the top. So if I turn quickly to the side here on the video, watch this. Boom. Normal jab is here. My chin is exposed. Now when I do it, I'm diving over the top. That does a bunch of other things, right? But what happens is now my striking capabilities become offensive and defensive at the same time, because it's offensive as I'm hitting somebody, defensive because I'm protecting the lines that are the most important lines to protect. It also lines up my hand properly, and so I don't injure my hand, and I don't have time to talk about that, and you should just come and train with us so we can show you. But beyond that, my point to this is that diving board action isn't going to work if I do it out of a straight structure. That's why we have a hunchback stance. We have specific things within Crazy Monkey Defense that we teach that when you connect the dots, it makes it a formidable self-preservation system. You cannot just take the defense. Nobody in Crazy Monkey, first off, stands upright in an upright fighting stance and defends like this with their body exposed. Okay? The second I see a well-known martial artist talking shit about my program like that, I'm like, dude, seriously? You didn't even take the time to understand the core principles behind this. Had you understood the core principles behind what I teach, you wouldn't be saying what you're saying right now. I'm going to be locked down. I'm going to lock my lower rib area into my hips, take all the space away, elbows are down almost to my hips. And then when I defend, it's a moment in time and my hands are always coming back. I'm not standing like this, and I'm definitely not standing like that. That's not CM. So when I see people ripping off my fucking program on the internet, you jackasses, right, who don't want to spend any money and do it the right way and make the fucking investment like you're supposed to, this is the kind of shit that you do, and then other people see that and they think that's what CM is about. It isn't. Again, as I've been noting, Crazy Monkey Defense is a complete system. It's not just the defense. I gave an example of the diving board. I gave an example of the hunchback stance. What about the spirals of the fight? If you go, what the fuck is Rodney talking about? Because you haven't trained CM, so you don't know what I'm talking about. There are different stages of a fight. Those stages of a fight require different tactics. Not only do they require different physical tactics, but psychologically and emotionally, a person will engage at different ranges differently. You need to know what those are and how to manage those appropriately. So what starts coming out of this discussion is Crazy Monkey actually has a game plan. a fight game plan, so that we can deal with the different components of a fight and implement the appropriate overarching strategies and the tactics that make up those strategies in those specific positions. So again, anyone who either rips off my material or claims to know what I teach, but all you see is defense, and often done out of a straight fighting stance position with elbows up, you know, as soon as you see that, that is bullshit. And that is not crazy monkey defense. And as I noted earlier, we have different types of defense depending on what my relationship is and my distance to the threat in front of me. Not even taking into account all the discussions that we have in our studios and academies around the world, and when I'm teaching seminars coming up in the next couple of weeks about addressing how to apply a combat athletic base in a self-preservation environment. Things like decentralized focus, things like verbal jiu-jitsu, things like distance management, things like talking about why, as I put on my free course that I just put out that you can get on my site, crazymonkeydefense.com, why defense is primary. Why we don't believe that you can predict what your opponent's going to do, and what the fuck can you do about it? Because these are really important questions that need to be addressed if you are honest about learning how to defend yourself. Everything I do has a reason. Every drill has a point. I don't believe in this approach where this attitude in the martial arts world, it fucking annoys me, where people talk about, you know, everything that martial arts people do has value. You just need to know the strengths and the weaknesses. No, just at the end of the day, some kinds of training methodology are bullshit. And it doesn't matter how much you do it, it's not going to do anything for your fight game. I'm not going to do anything that's not going to directly enhance my ability to deploy my fight skills when I need it. And I don't mean that in some kind of egotistical, aggressive, asshole kind of way. But at the end of the day, if I need to fight, I'm going to fight. And on that day, you better bring everything you've got. Because you're going to have to take me out. And when I say take me out, you're going to have to kill me to stop me, right? Because my mindset is different to your mindset. The difference between me and most other people who say they teach reality-based self-defense is I've been in the reality. And I am willing to go into the reality. And I know what I need to do to go into the reality, right? It's one thing, like again, I see this all the time. I see people teaching shit. Again, I saw a video yesterday of somebody teaching some bullshit, right, on how to deal with a certain situation. I'm like, dude, just because you fucking thought about it doesn't mean it has any value of you putting it out there. Because I can clearly see you haven't tested this freaking thing. And again, person's like, you know, this was with the blade. Person's got a blade. He's kind of just standing there. He's not doing anything. He's not even waving it around. You know, he's not moving back and forwards, pacing, whatever. He's just standing there. Of course, dude. Of course you can do whatever you like, right? I've been saying this for the last few videos. I mean, this bullshit, I don't think it's going to go away. The only thing we can do about it is we can educate people, we can wake people up, and we can offer people the opportunity to come down and actually do something real about their personal safety. Here's the interesting thing. Most of the people that are going to search out what I have to offer are going to be students, not people who want to teach. Because these people who want to teach, they want to hide away. They are so full of ego bullshit and so full of insecurities, right? That's why they keep presenting what they do over and over in the way that they do it without ever having to put their money where their mouth is, because they don't want to go down that road. I think it has to do with the quest for power, to be seen as being the alpha, to be seen as being the fountain of all reality-based self-defense knowledge, for people to treat them differently, right? It's about, like I said, power. It's about wanting to feel powerful because they are powerless, right? If they were really about the honest expression of self-preservation with the idea of keeping other human beings, their fellow human beings, their friends, the people they care about safe, they wouldn't dare put out garbage like that. They wouldn't dare teach stuff like that, because I know and they know deep down inside that what they are teaching doesn't work. They know that. But to go the other route, to go the route of real true functionality, to really put yourself out there, to see that what you are telling other people is going to work, isn't going to be nice. It's hard. There's a lot of psychological and emotional work you have to do. There's all these demons that inside yourself that you have to confront, and it's difficult. You know why I say that? Because I've been there, done it, and got the t-shirt, right? There are still times today, even today, as long as I've been training, where I find myself sometimes second guessing myself, where sometimes I'm in the midst of a sparring match and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can handle this guy. This guy is that good, right? Or I'm scanning the environment like I used to do in the old days. I used to scan the environment in my old seminars when I used to go and teach. And at the end of every seminar, I would put my money where my mouth was, and I would say, I'll spar anybody and everybody on the mat. But what people didn't know was, in the back of my mind, I'm going, fuck, I hope I get through this, right? Because that's the reality of teaching reality. You know that you always at a point, a second away from losing. To think that you can't lose is super egotistical, right? And so as good as you know your material is, at the end of the day, you know that you are human as well, and human beings make mistakes. So I would scan the environment. I would look what I thought were the toughest and best fighters on the floor and take them first, because I knew that that was going to be the hardest battle. And going into that, sometimes I was nervous, sometimes afraid, sometimes apprehensive, sometimes in my head going, whoa, what the fuck, man? It's one thing, again, if you're going to compete and for 3 months that you're training for one person. Imagine you in a seminar, all these people are pitched up, you don't know anything about them. You have no idea where these guys have come from. Some of them, and have been, this was my experience, might be world champions in different disciplines, right? A regional boxing champion, a kickboxing champion, a K1 champion, an MMA champion. You don't know, right? And then you say, hey, okay, I've taught you all. And plus, on top of it, to make it even worse, I've just taught them my stuff. I've just taught them what to do. And then say, hey, everybody, let's spar. I'll spar anybody on the mat. Can you imagine? That's a lot worse than competing, man. Because right there in that moment in time, you could have 4 or 5 world champions in a row come up to you and touch gloves and let's go. And in the old days, we didn't talk about the way we talk now about keeping safe. Let's calm down. Let's challenge play, so forth and so forth. I'm not going to spar anybody who's going to try to use me as a punching bag, which I do now, right? Because in hindsight, that wasn't the best way to train. But I'm trying to make a point, okay? That nobody, there can be people out there that don't like me, and I know there are a lot of people that don't like me, and that's perfectly fine. But there's one thing they can never say about me, that I wasn't at all times prepared to get on the mat with anyone and show them that what I teach works. As scary as it was, that's what I always did. And I think that's super important, because that's what's missing. It's easy to stand in front of a group of people and show all these pre-rehearsed movements of what you're going to do, but then nobody ever gets to see you perform. Why don't you want to perform? You're afraid. Well, I was afraid. Fear is only fear if you allow it to take control of you. The one thing that I learned early on was that just because you're afraid doesn't mean you can't perform. That's the beautiful thing. Now, even that, just saying that requires training. You need to understand the inner game, and that's something that we teach in Crazy Monkey Defense. Because to say that you're not going to be afraid, the only people who are not going to be afraid are going to be psychopaths. Everybody's afraid, no matter who they are. Fear is a good thing. Fear is a primer that primes you to get ready to survive a stressful encounter. Once you know how to manage your fear, how to apply it in the right way, you'll be surprised what you can do. I mean, you become unstoppable. Even in the face of things, inside that would stop anybody else from ever even stepping on that mat. That's the beautiful thing about training and what we do. So anyway, long rant. I realize that. Let me end off. I'm going to go do my packing. Follow me on Facebook. We'll be talking the whole way through as we move. One of my students, Neville's coming with me. First time to the US for him. He's super excited. He's like a child. He's like a kid at Christmas. Yeah, keep safe. Keep training real. Keep sending me PMs. Love hearing from everybody. Until the next one.